The sound of the slap did not just break the silence of the VIP suite. It was a sharp, wet crack that reverberated off the pristine, cream-colored walls like a pistol shot fired in a cathedral. For a heartbeat that felt longer than a lifetime, there was no air in the room, only the violent stinging sensation blooming across Ruth Vance's cheek and the ringing in her ears that drowned out the rhythmic hum of the fetal monitor. Ruth gasped, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with a shock that eclipsed even the agony of her labor. The sterile scent of antiseptic and lilies was suddenly choked by the metallic taste of fear. She stared up from the high hospital bed, her vision swimming with tears and exhaustion. Standing over her was not a caregiver, not a guardian of life, but a specter of cold, unadulterated malice. Nurse Bae Mi-kyung stood rigid, her white uniform immaculate, her face a mask of smooth, porcelain indifference that barely concealed the venom beneath. This was the woman who had sworn an oath to protect her, to guide her through the most vulnerable passage of her life. Instead, Nurse Bae looked down at Ruth as if she were a smudge of dirt on an otherwise perfect painting. "Stop being so dramatic," Nurse Bae said, her voice dropping to a low, jagged whisper that cut deeper than a scream. "Women have been birthing children for thousands of years in fields and caves. Do not think you are special just because you managed to trap a wealthy man. You are not special." Ruth's breath hitched in her throat, transforming into a ragged sob. The room tilted on its axis. Deep in her lower abdomen, the tightening began again, a slow, crushing wave of pressure that signaled another contraction. It started as a dull ache in her spine and wrapped around her belly like a vice made of hot iron. She needed to breathe. She needed to focus. But her mind was fractured, broken by the physical assault she had just endured. "Please," Ruth whispered, her voice trembling, cracking under the weight of her fear. "Please. You need to help me." "I need you to be quiet," Nurse Bae interrupted, turning her back on Ruth with a deliberate, terrifying slowness. She walked to the monitor, her fingers adjusting a dial with precise, uncaring movements. "Your husband's money has bought you this room, yes? It has bought you the view of the Han River and the imported sheets. But it does not buy you the right to disturb the peace of my floor." The words were precise, calculated missiles designed to dismantle Ruth's dignity. Ruth had felt this before, the subtle shifts in atmosphere when she entered a high-end boutique in Gangnam, the whispers behind hands at gala dinners when she stood beside Kang Tae-Wook. She knew the weight of being a foreign, black woman in circles that valued homogeneity above all else. But this was different. This wasn't a snub at a dinner party. This was violence in a sanctuary. The contraction hit its peak, a blinding crescendo of pain that forced a guttural cry from Ruth's lips. She clutched the cold metal rails of the bed, her knuckles turning ash-gray, her body arching instinctively. Nurse Bae did not flinch. She did not turn around. She simply stood there, checking her watch, tapping her pen against her clipboard as if she were waiting for a boring commercial break to end. Outside the panoramic window, the sky over Seoul was weeping. A torrential storm had been battering the glass for hours, the rain sluicing down in thick, gray sheets that turned the city lights into blurred streaks of neon blood. The thunder rumbled low and angry, vibrating through the floorboards of the 7th floor. The VIP maternity wing of Blue Crown Medical Center was designed for isolation, for the utmost privacy of the city's elite. Tonight, that privacy felt like a tomb. Ruth's eyes darted to the side table. Her phone lay there, a sleek black monolith that offered her only lifeline. The screen remained stubbornly dark. Dead. She had spent the last 2 hours watching the battery percentage tick down, making call after call to Tae-Wook, praying to hear his deep, steady voice. He promised. The words echoed in her mind, a frantic mantra. He promised he would be here. He kissed my forehead. He said, "I will be back before the first pain comes." But he wasn't here. And the battery was dead. And she was alone with a monster. "Water," Ruth rasped as the contraction finally began to recede, leaving her muscles trembling and her skin slick with cold sweat. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Please, can I have some water?" Nurse Bae finally turned, her eyes scanning Ruth's sweat-drenched face with a look of undisguised revulsion. "You can wait," she said simply. "I have other patients. Patients who actually require my medical expertise, not just hand-holding." "There is no one else on this floor," Ruth said, a sudden surge of adrenaline giving her voice a momentary steeliness. She had to fight. She had to survive this. "I heard the shift change report. The other suites are empty tonight. It is just me." Nurse Bay's jaw tightened, a small muscle feathering beneath her ear. For a fleeting second, the professional mask slipped entirely, revealing a flash of something dangerous, a chaotic, unhinged rage that made Ruth's survival instincts scream. But then, the nurse smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth, sharp as a scalpel. "Then I suppose," Nurse Bay said softly, stepping closer to the door, "you will have plenty of undisturbed time to think about how lucky you are. To reflect on your greed. To think about what happens when you take things that do not belong to you." Before Ruth could process the threat, before she could ask what things she had taken, Nurse Bay stepped into the corridor. She did not just close the door. She pulled it shut with a heavy, final thud. And then, the sound that stopped Ruth's heart cold, the distinct, mechanical click of a deadbolt sliding into place. Ruth stared at the heavy oak door. Her mind refused to accept the data. This was a hospital. A place of healing. A place Tae-Wook had paid a fortune to secure because it was the best. Nurses did not slap patients. They did not deny water. And they certainly did not lock women in active labor inside soundproof rooms. Another contraction began to build, rolling in faster this time, darker and more intense. Ruth opened her mouth to scream, not from the pain, but from the sudden, horrific realization of her helplessness. She screamed for help. She screamed for the doctor. She screamed for her husband. Tae-Wook. But the only answer was the roar of the thunder outside and the terrifying silence of the empty corridor beyond the locked door. Before we find out if Ruth and her unborn baby can survive this nightmare, I need you to smash that subscribe button right now. Join the Afro Soul family. We are building a community here, and you do not want to miss what happens next in this story. If you are already subscribed, hit the like button to show your support for Ruth. Let's get back to the story. Across the sprawling, rain-soaked expanse of Seoul, in a district that smelled of diesel fumes, salt water, and old rust, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of violence. Inside a cavernous warehouse on the docks, the air was cold and damp. The only light came from flickering halogen strips suspended high above, casting long, dancing shadows against the corrugated metal walls. In the center of this vast, industrial cathedral sat a single steel table, surrounded by 4 men. Kang Tae-Wook sat with his back to the darkness, his posture relaxed, but coiled, like a tiger feigning sleep. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than the warehouse itself, the fabric perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. On the table in front of him sat a crystal tumbler of amber whiskey untouched. Tae-Wook did not drink with enemies, and tonight, he was certain he was surrounded by them. Across from him sat Director Ryu, a man with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that glittered with reptilian patience. Ryu was flanked by 2 bodyguards, thick-necked men with hands that hovered perpetually near the lapels of their jackets. "We appreciate you coming personally, CEO Kang," Director Ryu said, his voice raspy, sliding a thick leather folder across the scarred metal table. "Given the delicate nature of this transition into the legitimate shipping sector, your presence honors us." Tae-Wook did not look at the contract. He kept his gaze fixed on Ryu, his dark eyes unreadable, stripping away the older man's pleasantries to find the intent beneath. This meeting was the culmination of 2 years of work, a deal that would finalize the transition of Tae-Wook's organization from the gray markets into fully legal logistics. It was supposed to be his exit ticket, a way to ensure that his child, his daughter, would never have to carry the stain of his past. But the intelligence he had received 3 hours ago whispered a different story. It suggested that Ryu wasn't planning to sign a partnership. He was planning a liquidation, a takeover. And Tae-Wook was the loose end to be snipped. "The nature of business is only delicate if one of us plans to break our word," Tae-Wook said, his voice a low baritone that carried effortlessly through the echoing space. Ryu's smile didn't waver, though the skin around his eyes tightened. Of course. We are men of honor, are we not? BZZT, BZZT. The vibration against Tae-Wook's chest was subtle, hidden in the interior pocket of his suit jacket. He ignored it. In a room like this, with men like Ryu, checking a phone was a sign of distraction. Distraction was weakness. Weakness was death. He had told Ruth he would be there. The guilt of that lie tasted bitter in his mouth, worse than the cheap air of the docks. But this deal, this was for her. It was for the baby. He had to secure the perimeter of their future before he could retreat inside it. BZZT, BZZT. The phone vibrated again. Persistent. Urgent. Director Ryu's eyes flicked briefly to Tae-Wook's chest. Do you need to take that, Kang? Perhaps the wife is calling. There was a mockery in the tone, a subtle jab at Tae-Wook's recent domestication. No, Tae-Wook said, his face a mask of granite. It can wait. He picked up the heavy fountain pen. The metal was cold against his fingers. He looked at the signature line. If he signed this, the network was safe. The money was clean. He could go to the hospital, hold Ruth's hand, and tell her that they were free. He uncapped the pen. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. The vibration was continuous now. A frantic pulse against his heart. Suddenly, the heavy iron door at the far end of the warehouse burst open with a crash that echoed like an explosion. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Ryu's bodyguards reached into their jackets, the glint of steel visible in the harsh light. Chief Han Seo-jun stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the driving rain. He was Tae-Wook's head of security, a man who was usually a ghost, silent, invisible, present only when violence was necessary. But now Seo-jun looked wild. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and there was blood fresh, bright red blood smeared across his knuckles. The 3 guards Tae-Wook had stationed outside were nowhere to be seen. Hold! Tae-Wook commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. The bodyguards froze, their weapons half drawn. Seo-jun didn't look at the guns. He didn't look at Ryu. He looked straight at Tae-Wook, his chest heaving with exertion. Sir, Seo-jun gasped, stepping into the light, ignoring the water dripping from his clothes onto the concrete. It's your wife. The world stopped. The warehouse, the contract, the threat of betrayal, the millions of dollars on the table, it all evaporated into mist. The only thing that remained was the terror in Seo-jun's eyes. Tae-Wook was on his feet before the pen hit the table. The chair clattered backward, falling over with a loud clang. What happened? Tae-Wook's voice was no longer the smooth baritone of a CEO. It was the growl of a predator whose den has been breached. She has been trying to reach you, Seo-jun said rapidly, walking toward the table, his hands raised to show he held no weapon, though his eyes promised murder. The hospital called my private line when yours didn't answer. There is a problem. A distress signal from the room monitoring system was manually overridden, and then the feed cut. The administration is claiming a technical glitch, but my contact on the floor says he heard screaming before the audio died. Tae-Wook didn't ask permission to leave. He didn't apologize to Director Ryu. He didn't explain. He simply turned his back on the men who wanted to kill him and began to walk. His stride was long, eating up the distance to the door. Kang! Ryu barked, slamming his hand on the table. You walk out now, and the deal is void. You insult me, and you insult my family. There will be consequences. Tae-Wook stopped. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and terrifying in the shadows. Ryu, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. If I find out that you or your people had anything to do with delaying me tonight, if a single hair on my wife's head is harmed because I was here listening to you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air in the warehouse dropped 10 degrees. Even Ryu, a man who had ordered executions over dinner, looked unsettled. Tae-Wook pushed past Seo-jun and burst out into the night. The rain hit him instantly, soaking through the expensive wool of his suit, but he didn't feel it. His black Mercedes Maybach was idling at the curb, the engine purring like a restrained beast. Drive, Tae-Wook snarled as he threw himself into the back seat. Blue Crown Medical Center. Now. Sir, the roads are flooded. The traffic is the driver began. I do not care about the traffic. Tae-Wook roared, slamming his fist into the leather seat. Drive on the sidewalk if you have to. Get me to my wife. The car surged forward, tires screeching on the wet asphalt, fishtailing slightly before gripping the road and launching into the storm. Tae-Wook pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. 6 missed calls from Ruth. 6 voicemails. He felt a physical pain in his chest, sharp and agonizing, as if his heart were being squeezed by a giant hand. He had ignored them. He had sat there, playing the stoic boss, while she was calling for him. He dialed the hospital's main line. His fingers were shaking. Blue Crown Medical Center, how may I direct your? This is Kang Tae-Wook, he interrupted, his voice dropping to a register that made the receptionist on the other end stumble over her words. Connect me to the administrator of the VIP maternity wing. Immediately. There was a series of clicks, then a breathless voice. Mr. Kang? This is Administrator Choi. We have been trying to reach you. Why is my wife's phone off? Tae-Wook demanded. Why is the security feed down? Sir, there seems to be a slight malfunction with the room's comms, Administrator Choi stammered, the fear palpable even through the cellular connection. And your wife, she is in active labor. It is a chaotic time. I am sure she simply turned it off to focus. Who is attending to her? The head nurse of the night shift. Nurse Bae. She is very experienced, Mr. Kang. Very senior. I want a doctor in that room, Tae-Wook commanded, watching the city blur past the rain-streaked window. I am 10 minutes away. I want a doctor with my wife now. Not a nurse. A doctor. And I want the security feed restored before I arrive, or I will dismantle that hospital brick by brick to find her myself. Do you understand me? I will personally check on her, sir. Right away. The line went dead. Tae-Wook gripped the phone so hard the screen threatened to crack. He looked out at the rain, at the red taillights of the cars ahead of them. Hold on, Ruth, he thought, sending the message out into the universe with every ounce of his will. I am coming. I am coming. Back in the hospital room, time had lost all meaning for Ruth. The pain was a living thing now, a creature that lived inside her hips and spine, tearing her apart from the inside out. She was curled on her side, clutching her belly, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The room was dark, save for the blinking lights of the medical equipment and the lightning that flashed intermittently through the window, illuminating her prison in stark, strobe light bursts. She had tried the door again. It was locked tight. She had banged on it until her palms were bruised, screaming until her voice was a husky whisper. No one came. The soundproofing that was meant to ensure her privacy was now ensuring her isolation. Her cheek still throbbed, a hot, pulsing reminder of the violation. But the physical pain of the slap paled in comparison to the psychological terror. She was trapped. She was alone. And something was wrong. The pressure was changing. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was a distinctive, undeniable urge to push. Her body was taking over, bypassing her fear, bypassing her conscious mind. The baby was coming. Now. No, 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 Ruth whimpered, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. Not yet. Not alone. Please, God, not alone. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. She needed help. She needed sanitized hands. She needed Tae-Wook. The door handle rattled. Ruth froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was it help? Or was it her? The lock clicked. The doors swung open. It wasn't Nurse Bae. It was Kang Tae-Wook. He stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his suit ruined, his hair dripping water onto the polished floor. His chest was heaving, his eyes wide and wild as he scanned the room. For a second, he looked terrifying, a creature of the storm, bringing the chaos in with him. But then his eyes landed on her. He saw her curled form. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the red, angry welt rising on her cheek. The transformation was instant. The monster vanished, and the husband remained. Ruth. His voice cracked on her name, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. He was across the room in 3 strides, moving faster than she had ever seen him move. He fell to his knees beside the bed, his wet hands hovering over her face, afraid to touch, afraid to hurt. "You came," Ruth whispered, the relief washing over her so powerfully that she almost passed out. "You actually came." "I am here," Tae-Wook choked out. He reached out and gently, so gently, cupped the side of her face that wasn't bruised. His thumb grazed the edge of her lip, trembling. His eyes were dark pools of horror as he inspected the mark on her cheek. "Who did this?" The question was whispered, but the tone made the air in the room vibrate. It was a sound from the deep, dark places of the world. "I'm okay," Ruth lied, trying to smile, but her lip quivered. The baby is coming, Tae-Wook." But the nurse." "Ruth," Tae-Wook said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Who touched you?" Ruth closed her eyes, a fresh tear tracking through the sweat on her face. "Nurse Bae," she whispered. She got angry when I asked for water. She said I was dramatic. She locked the door." Tae-Wook went very still. It was the stillness of a bomb the second before detonation. He looked at the bruise again. He looked at the locked door. He looked at the empty water pitcher. Another contraction seized Ruth, arching her back off the mattress. She cried out, gripping Tae-Wook's wet sleeve. "Tae-Wook," she screamed. He snapped back to the present. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it, anchoring her. "I am here," he said, his voice fierce. "Breathe with me. Just like we practiced. Look at me, Ruth. Look at me." He counted the seconds with her, his voice steady and low, guiding her through the wave of agony. 1, 2, 3. He didn't look away. He absorbed her pain with his eyes. When the contraction passed, Ruth slumped back, gasping. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you had the meeting. I know it was important." "Stop," Tae-Wook said. He brushed a wet strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers were cold, but his touch was fire. "Nothing is more important than you. Nothing in this universe. Do you understand me?" She nodded, too exhausted to argue. Tae-Wook stood up. He adjusted his wet jacket. He ran a hand through his damp hair, pushing it back from his forehead. When he turned toward the open door, his face had changed. The panic was gone. The guilt was compartmentalized. What remained was a cold, geometric rage. "Stay here," he said softly. "I need to speak to the staff." "Tae-Wook, don't." "I will be right back," he promised. "I am just going to ensure we get a new nurse." He walked to the door. He stepped out into the bright, silent corridor. He could hear voices now. Nervous whispers coming from the nurses' station around the corner. They knew he was here. They knew the wolf had entered the fold. Tae-Wook didn't shout. He didn't run. He adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. And then he spoke, his voice carrying down the hallway with the lethal precision of a sniper's bullet. "I need the head nurse," he called out. "Nurse Bae Mi-kyung. Bring her to me. Now." The whispers stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. It was the silence of a jungle when the apex predator steps into the clearing. From the nurse's station, a figure detached itself from the huddled group of staff. Nurse Bae Mi-kyung walked toward him. She moved with a stiff, indignant gait, her chin held high, clutching her clipboard like a shield. She was a woman in her late 40s, her face still composed in that mask of severe professionalism, though Tae-Wook could see the tremor in her hands. She stopped 5 feet from him, maintaining a distance that she likely hoped was safe. It wasn't. "Mr. Kang," she said, her voice steady but thin. "I am Nurse Bae. I have been caring for your wife. There is no need for shouting. This is a hospital." "You hit her," Tae-Wook said. He didn't shout it. He didn't scream. He said it with the quiet, factual certainty of a judge reading a death sentence. The professional mask slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing the panic beneath. Then, she plastered it back on. "I beg your pardon? That is a serious accusation." "You struck my wife while she was in labor," Tae-Wook continued, taking one slow step toward her. His wet shoes squeaked against the linoleum, a harsh sound in the quiet corridor. "While she was alone. While she was vulnerable. While she was begging you for water." Nurse Bae's face flushed a mottled, ugly red. "Sir, I do not know what she told you, but women in labor, they are often confused." delirious from the pain. They imagine things. I may have been firm with her when she became hysterical, for the safety of the baby, of course, but I would never strike a patient. Are you calling her a liar? The question hung in the air, cold and sharp as a guillotine blade. Tae-Wook tilted his head, his eyes boring into hers. Nurse Bae opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around for support, but the other nurses had vanished, terrified of being caught in the blast radius. Administrator Choi and 2 security guards were now jogging down the hall, looking breathless and pale, but Tae-Wook ignored them. His world had narrowed down to this woman. "Show me your hands," Tae-Wook commanded. "Excuse me." "Your hands," he repeated. "Show them to me." Nurse Bae hesitated. She looked at the approaching security guards, perhaps hoping they would intervene. But the guards slowed to a walk as they saw Tae-Wook's face. They knew who he was. They knew the rumors. They knew that interfering now would be suicide. Slowly, defiantly, Nurse Bae held out her hands, palms up. Tae-Wook looked down. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The evidence was there, etched in the flesh. Across her right palm, there was a faint, diffuse redness. The kind of capillary trauma that comes from a high-velocity impact against a soft surface. "The bruise on my wife's face," Tae-Wook said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made the administrator stop in his tracks 10 feet away. "It matches the geometry of your hand perfectly. The angle of the thumb. The width of the palm. Would you like me to call the police forensics team to verify that? Or would you prefer to drop the charade and tell me the truth?" Nurse Bae's composure shattered. The mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. Her face twisted into a snarl of ugly, raw emotion. "Do you have any idea what people like you have done?" she hissed, stepping forward, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a burning, irrational hatred. "What your business has destroyed. My husband, he was a good man. He worked for 20 years in logistics. And then your company bought his. You streamlined. You cut costs. You fired him." Tae-Wook watched her, his expression unreadable. "He lost everything," she screamed, her voice cracking. "His pension. His dignity. He sits at home and drinks while I work double shifts to pay the rent. And then she comes in here." She gestured wildly toward Ruth's room. "That foreign girl. Walking around dripping in diamonds, treated like royalty, demanding special water, demanding silence. Acting like she is better than us. Like she deserves to be worshipped." "So you hit her," Tae-Wook finished. "You hit a pregnant woman in active labor because you blame me for your husband's incompetence. He didn't fail." Nurse Bae shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "You ruined him. You people ruin everything you touch. You take and you take, and then you expect the rest of us to bow and scrape and be grateful for the scraps you leave behind. We are witnessing a moment of absolute, raw confrontation here. If you are enjoying this story so far, hit the like button right now. And let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Tae-Wook's shoes? Your engagement helps us bring you more powerful stories like this. Now, let's see how the Dragon of Seoul responds. Tae-Wook studied her for a long, silent moment. He looked at her not with anger, but with the cold detachment of an entomologist studying a poisonous insect. He saw the grief. He saw the rage. He saw how poverty and loss had festered in her heart until it turned into something rot. He understood vengeance. He had lived his life by it. But vengeance against the innocent? That was the mark of a coward. "Call the police," Tae-Wook said, turning his head slightly to address Administrator Choi, who was trembling by the nurse's station. "And call your legal department. You are going to need them." The color drained from Nurse Bae's face as the adrenaline crashed. You can't." "I can," Tae-Wook said softly. "And I will. You assaulted a patient. You held her prisoner. There will be security footage of the hallway. There will be digital logs of the door lock. And if I find out that anyone else on this staff knew what you were doing and looked the other way, they will burn with you. My husband." She faltered, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "Your husband is not my concern," Tae-Wook said. "But you? I will ensure you never work in healthcare again. I will ensure that every hospital, every clinic, every nursing home in this country knows your name and what you did tonight." He signaled to the security guards. "Get her out of my sight." Nurse Bae didn't fight as the guards took her arms. She looked deflated, small, and pathetic. But as they dragged her away, she cast one last look at Tae-Wook, a look of pure, concentrated malice that promised this wasn't over. Tae-Wook met her gaze and felt nothing. He had stared down men with machine guns. A bitter nurse was nothing to him. Mr. Kang, Administrator Choi stammered, wringing his hands, sweat beading on his forehead. I am deeply, deeply sorry. This is unprecedented. We will, of course, cover all medical costs. The entire VIP floor is yours. Anything you need. I do not want your money, Tae-Wook said, cutting through the man's panic. I want a full internal investigation. I want to know how long she has been abusing patients. And right now, in this moment, I want a new nurse. Someone competent. Someone kind. Someone who remembers that their job is to heal, not to harm. Yes, of course, Choi said, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. Matron Lim. I will call Matron Lim. She is the best we have. She was off duty, but she lives nearby. I will get her here in 10 minutes. You have 5, Tae-Wook said. He turned his back on the administrator and walked back toward room 704. He stopped at the door, taking a deep breath, letting the mask of the ruthless CEO fall away. He couldn't bring that energy into the room. Ruth didn't need the dragon. She needed her husband. He pushed the door open. Ruth was where he had left her, but she had curled tighter into herself. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide and fearful, scanning the space behind him as if expecting Nurse Bae to return. Is she? Ruth asked, her voice small. She is gone, Tae-Wook said firmly, closing the door and locking it this time, to keep the world out, not to keep her in. She will never come near you again. The police are on their way to take her statement. It is over. You didn't hurt her? Ruth asked. She knew his past. She knew what he was capable of. I used the law, Tae-Wook said, crossing the room and kneeling beside the bed again. I did what a father should do. I protected my family. He took her hand. It was cold. He began to rub it between his own, trying to transfer his warmth to her. I am so sorry, Ruth, he whispered, pressing her knuckles against his forehead. I should have been here. I promised you. I let a contract, a piece of paper, distract me. You're here now, Ruth said softly, her fingers brushing his damp hair. That is what matters. It is not enough, he insisted, guilt twisting like a knife in his gut. I left you alone with her. I ignored your calls. I will spend the rest of my life making up for the last 3 hours. Ruth tried to smile, but her face contorted as another contraction rolled in. It was stronger this time, a tidal wave that lifted her hips off the bed. Tae-Wook moved instantly, slipping his arm behind her shoulders, supporting her, murmuring words of encouragement in a mix of Korean and English. Breathe, Jagia, he whispered. I have you. I have you. When the pain subsided, there was a soft knock on the door. Tae-Wook stiffened, his body shielding Ruth instinctively. Come in. The door opened, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It wasn't the administrator. It wasn't a guard. A woman walked in who looked like the personification of comfort. She was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back into a neat, soft bun. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but they were the kind of wrinkles etched by decades of smiling. She wore the same uniform as Nurse Bae, but on her, it looked like a hug rather than a straitjacket. Mr. and Mrs. Kang, she said, her voice warm and melodious, like a cello. I am Matron Lim So-hee. I hear we have had a terrible night. I am here to make the morning better. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't bow excessively. She walked straight to the bed, her eyes fixed on Ruth with an expression of profound, genuine compassion. Oh, my dear, Matron Lim said, seeing the bruise on Ruth's cheek. She didn't gasp. She didn't make a scene. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, cold gel pack, and gently pressed it to Ruth's face. I am so sorry. That should never, ever have happened to you. Ruth let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Thank you. Now, Matron Lim said, turning to the monitors, her movements efficient but fluid. Let us check on this little one. She has had a bumpy ride, hasn't she? But babies are tough. Tougher than we think. She adjusted the sensors, checked the heart rate, and smiled. Listen to that. Strong. Steady like a drum. She is ready to meet you. Over the next 2 hours, the hospital room transformed. The storm outside began to break, the thunder rolling away into the distance, replaced by the steady, rhythmic patter of rain. Inside, the fear that had choked the air dissipated, replaced by a focused, intense determination. Matron Lim was a force of nature. She dimmed the harsh fluorescent lights, bringing in a soft lamp from the hallway. She brought ice chips. She showed Tae-Wook how to apply counterpressure to Ruth's lower back, guiding his hands with a firm, motherly touch. Push here, she instructed him. Harder. Don't be afraid. She won't break. She is a warrior. Tae-Wook did as he was told. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the boss. He was the support. And he found a strange, terrifying beauty in it. He wiped Ruth's forehead. He held the water cup, the water she had been denied, to her lips. He whispered stories to her between contractions, stories about the house, about the nursery, about the cherry blossoms that would be blooming when they took their daughter home. I can't, Ruth gasped during a particularly brutal transition. Her body was shaking violently. Tae-Wook, I can't do it anymore. It hurts too much. You can, Tae-Wook said, his voice fierce, his face inches from hers. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You dealt with my world. You dealt with the stairs. You dealt with her. This is just life, Ruth. It is just life waiting to start. You can do this. Matron Lim checked the dilation. She looked up, her eyes crinkling. Mr. Kang is right. And you do not have a choice, my dear, because this baby is knocking on the door. It is time. A doctor hurried in, Dr. Park, the chief obstetrician, looking disheveled as if she had run up the stairs. She quickly scrubbed in, taking her place at the foot of the bed. Okay, Ruth, Dr. Park said, her voice calm and authoritative. On the next contraction, I need you to push. With everything you have. The next 30 minutes were a blur of primal effort. It was a battle. Tae-Wook felt useless and essential all at once. He held Ruth's hand so hard he thought he might break her fingers, but she was squeezing back with a grip that could crush steel. She screamed a raw, guttural sound that tore through his heart, but she pushed. She fought. I see the head, Dr. Park announced. She has a full head of hair. One more, Ruth. The biggest one yet. Come on, Ruth. Tae-Wook shouted, his composure gone, tears streaming down his own face. Bring her home. Bring her to us. Ruth arched forward, her face contorted, veins bulging in her neck, and gave a final, earth-shattering push that seemed to expel the last of her fear along with the life she had carried for 9 months. And then silence. For a split second, the room was suspended in time. Then a cry. It was thin at first, then loud, indignant, and furious. A wail that announced to the universe, I am here. I matter. Tae-Wook felt his knees give out. He slumped against the bed rail, watching through blurred vision as Dr. Park lifted a small, slick, wriggling creature into the air. It's a girl, Dr. Park smiled. A beautiful, perfect girl. They placed the baby on Ruth's chest. The transformation in Ruth was immediate. The agony vanished from her face, replaced by a look of wonder so profound it looked like holiness. She reached out with trembling hands to touch the wet, dark hair of her daughter. Hi, Ruth sobbed, laughing and crying simultaneously. Hi, baby. Oh my God. Hi. Tae-Wook leaned over them, wrapping his massive arms around both his wife and his child. He buried his face in Ruth's neck, smelling the sweat and the blood and the scent of new life. He was shaking. The man who controlled half the shipping in Seoul, the man who made rivals tremble, was weeping openly. She is perfect, he whispered, his voice broken. Look at her hands, Ruth. Look at her hands. She looks like you, Ruth whispered, tracing the baby's eyes. She has your strength, Tae-Wook countered. She has your fire. Matron Lim stepped forward, smiling gently. Let us get this little princess cleaned up, shall we? And let Mom rest. While the nurses attended to the baby, weighing, measuring, swaddling, Tae-Wook stayed glued to Ruth's side. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her cheeks. He kissed the bruise that was now darkening on her skin. "Does it hurt?" he asked, touching the mark. "I don't feel it," Ruth said, her eyes not leaving the baby across the room. "I don't feel anything but love." There was a knock on the door. Tae-Wook turned, his protective instinct flaring again. Administrator Choi stood there, looking apologetic. "Mr. Kang? The police are here. Detective Park needs a statement regarding the incident with the former nurse." Tae-Wook looked at Ruth. He didn't want to leave. Not for a second. "Go," Ruth said, squeezing his hand. "Make sure they understand. Do it for us. Do it for her." She nodded toward the baby. "I will be right outside," Tae-Wook promised. He stepped into the corridor. 2 police officers stood there. One was young, looking nervous to be in the VIP wing. The other was older, wearing a rumpled trench coat with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Kang," the older officer said. "I am Detective Park. I understand there was an assault." "Yes," Tae-Wook said, straightening his spine, the steel returning to his posture. "But it was not just an assault. It was a hate crime. And I want to ensure the charges reflect that." "Her husband is Seo Junho," Detective Park said, flipping open a small, battered notebook. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Tae-Wook went still. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed a low, electric drone. The name didn't just mean something. It was a line item in a ledger he had reviewed 3 months ago. Seo Junho, Tae-Wook repeated, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with a sickening click. He was a mid-level logistics manager at Hanol Shipping, a subsidiary I acquired last year. He was terminated, Detective Park noted, watching Tae-Wook closely. "According to his wife, you fired him to cut costs. She claims you destroyed their livelihood to buy another sports car." "He was terminated for embezzlement," Tae-Wook corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. "He was skimming 10% off the top of our international freight contracts. He stole nearly $200,000 over 18 months. We had the evidence. We had the bank transfers. I gave him a choice: resign quietly and pay back what he could or go to prison. He chose to resign." Detective Park raised an eyebrow. "So, you showed him mercy." "I showed him a way out," Tae-Wook said. "And his wife, she didn't know?" "She knew he lost his job," Park said. "But apparently, he didn't tell her why. He told her the big, bad corporate raider Kang Tae-Wook came in and swept him out with the trash. She has been stewing in that lie for months. Watching you in the news. Watching your wife." Tae-Wook looked at the closed door of room 704. Behind it, Ruth was holding their daughter. Ruth, who knew nothing of shipping contracts or embezzlement or the dirty, gray morality of his business. Ruth, who had simply smiled at a woman who hated her for a lie. "People believe what they need to believe to survive the day," Tae-Wook said quietly. "Nurse Bae needed a villain to explain her misery. I was convenient. My wife was accessible." "It doesn't excuse what she did," Detective Park said, closing his notebook with a snap. "Assaulting a patient? Locking the door? That is criminal, regardless of the motivation. We found text messages on her phone to her husband. She boasted about teaching the princess a lesson. It shows premeditation." "Good," Tae-Wook said. "I want her license revoked. I want her charged. I want her to understand that while I may have shown her husband mercy, I have none left for her." "We will handle it, Mr. Kang. Go be with your family." Tae-Wook watched the police walk away. He felt a strange hollowness in his chest. It was the specific exhaustion of realizing that no matter how high he built his walls, the toxicity of the world could still seep through the cracks. Nurse Bae hadn't hated Ruth, she had hated a ghost, a symbol. And Ruth had paid the price. He turned back to the room. He needed to wash the taste of this conversation out of his mouth. Inside, the atmosphere was a sanctuary. The storm had fully passed, leaving the night sky clear and starless, the city lights below twinkling like a carpet of diamonds. Matron Lim was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, knitting something small and yellow. Ruth was asleep, her breathing deep and even, exhaustion finally claiming her. And in the bassinet beside the bed, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, lay his daughter. Tae-Wook walked over to the bassinet on silent feet. He looked down. She was so small. Impossibly small. Her eyelashes were long, resting against cheeks that were still flushed from the exertion of birth. Her tiny hand was curled into a fist, resting by her ear. How did people do this? How did they live with this much vulnerability? For years, Tae-Wook had protected his heart by hardening it, by turning himself into a fortress. Now, looking at this fragile life, he realized he had just handed his heart to the universe, unprotected and exposed. If anything happened to her, if the world touched her with its dirty hands. It is terrifying, isn't it? Matron Lim's voice was soft, barely a whisper. Tae-Wook looked up. She hadn't stopped knitting. What is? He asked. Loving something you cannot fully control, she said. You look at her and you see all the dangers in the world. You want to build a cage to keep her safe. But you cannot cage a bird and expect it to learn how to fly. Tae-Wook walked over to the window, standing near the older nurse. I can build a very large cage, he murmured, with very high walls. Matron Lim chuckled softly. You are a powerful man, Mr. Kang. I know who you are. Everyone in Seoul knows who you are. You fix problems. You remove obstacles. But this. She gestured to the room, to the bruise fading on Ruth's cheek. You couldn't stop this. Not with money. Not with fear. I should have been here, he said, the guilt flaring again. Yes, she agreed. But you are not. And it happened. The question is not how you could have prevented the past, but what you will do to change the future. Tae-Wook looked at her. I am ruining the nurse's life. Is that not changing the future? Matron Lim stopped knitting. She looked up at him with eyes that were sharp and wise. That is revenge. It is satisfying, like scratching an itch. But does it fix the hospital? Does it fix the culture that allowed Nurse Bae to feel she could get away with it? She did not act alone, Mr. Kang. She acted in a hallway where other nurses heard the screams and did nothing. She acted in a system that ignores complaints from patients who look like your wife. Tae-Wook frowned. What are you saying? I am saying, Matron Lim said, standing up and placing a hand on his arm, that you have resources. You have a voice that makes people tremble. If you want to protect your daughter, truly protect her, do not just destroy one bad woman. Fix the world she is going to grow up in. Make this hospital a place where no one would dare treat a patient that way, not out of fear of you, but out of respect for the rules you force them to implement. Tae-Wook looked back at his sleeping wife and child. He thought about the warehouse, the contract, the endless cycle of power and violence. Maybe it was time to use that power for something that didn't just enrich him, but actually built something. I will think about it, he said. That is all I ask, Matron Lim smiled. Now, try to sleep. The little one will be hungry soon, and then no one sleeps. We are approaching the finale of this journey, and the emotional stakes have never been higher. Before we see how Tae-Wook transforms his anger into action, take a second to verify you are subscribed. Join our family. Click that bell icon so you're the first to know when we drop the next masterpiece. Now, let's bring Ruth and the baby home. The sun rose over Seoul in a wash of pale gold and apricot. It gilded the skyscrapers and turned the Han River into a ribbon of light. Inside room 704, the light crept across the floor, waking Ruth. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, before the memories of the night rushed back. The pain, the fear, the birth. She turned her head. Tae-Wook was asleep in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed, his head resting on the mattress near her hand. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair messy. He looked younger like this. Less like the Dragon of Seoul and more like a tired father. Ruth reached out and ran her fingers through his hair. He stirred instantly, his eyes snapping open, alert. I'm awake, he said, his voice raspy. Is everything okay? Do you need the doctor? I'm fine, Ruth smiled, her voice soft. I just wanted to make sure you were real. He sat up, rubbing his face. He took her hand and kissed the palm. I am real. And I am not going anywhere. Where is she? Ruth asked, looking around. She is in the nursery getting her hearing test, Tae-Wook said. Matron Lim took her 10 minutes ago. She said she would be right back. Ruth leaned back against the pillows. We haven't named her yet. Not officially. Tae-Wook nodded. We talked about names for months. But none of them seem big enough now. I was thinking, Ruth said, tracing the pattern on the bedsheet. About Hannah. In Korean, it means one. She is our first. Our number one. Kang Tae-Wook tested the name. It felt right. Simple, elegant, strong. Hannah Kang. And for her middle name, Ruth continued. Grace. Because after everything that happened last night, looking at her feels like receiving a grace we didn't earn. A mercy. Hannah Grace Kang Tae-Wook said. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. It is perfect. It bridges our worlds. There was a knock on the door. It wasn't the nurse. It was Administrator Choi again. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He was carrying a tablet and looking even more nervous than he had the night before. Mr. Kang, Mrs. Kang, he bowed deeply. Good morning. I hope you found the rest of the night peaceful. It was adequate, Tae-Wook said, his tone cooling instantly. Do you have news? Yes, sir. Nurse Bae has been formally terminated. The police have filed initial charges of assault and unlawful confinement. We have also, the board has authorized me to offer you a settlement. A very generous one. To compensate for the distress. Tae-Wook stood up. He walked over to the administrator and towered over him. I told you last night, Choi. I do not want your money. But sir, I want change, Tae-Wook said. He remembered Matron Lim's words. He remembered the feeling of helplessness. I want you to draft a new policy. Today, I want a patient advocacy board established at this hospital. Independent oversight. I want anonymous reporting channels for patients and staff. I want mandatory anti-bias training for every single employee, from the surgeons to the janitors. And I want it funded by the hospital, not by donations. Choi blinked, stunned. Mr. Kang, that involves the board of directors. It will take months to. You have until noon to get their agreement, Tae-Wook said calmly. Or I will call a press conference. And I will stand there with my wife, with the bruises on her face, and I will tell the world that Blue Crown Medical Center locks pregnant women in rooms and denies them water. I will destroy your stock price before the market closes. Choi swallowed hard. He looked at Tae-Wook, then at Ruth. He saw the resolve in their eyes. I will make the calls, sir. I will get it done. Good. And one more thing, Tae-Wook added. Matron Lim So-hee. She is to be the head of this new advocacy board. Double her salary. Give her whatever authority she needs. Consider it done. Choi bowed again and practically ran from the room. When the door closed, Ruth looked at her husband with wide eyes. You really did that? I told you, Tae-Wook said, sitting back down and taking her hand. I am going to build a better world for her. It starts here. Who are you? Ruth teased gently, though her eyes were wet. What have you done with my ruthless gangster husband? He became a father, Tae-Wook said simply. And he realized that true power isn't about breaking things. It's about fixing them. The next 3 days were a blur of recovery and peace. They were moved to the Skyline Suite, a room that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a hospital. Ruth healed. Her strength returned, though the memory of the trauma lingered in the quiet moments. But the joy outweighed the fear. Hannah Grace was a quiet baby, watchful and calm, as if she knew her parents needed peace. When it was time to leave, the exit was a military operation. Chief Han Seo-jun had arranged for a private exit through the staff elevators to avoid the press that had caught wind of the incident at the hospital. Matron Lim walked them to the car. She carried Hannah, unwilling to let go until the very last second. She is fed, she is dry, and she is loved, Matron Lim said, handing the bundle to Ruth once she was settled in the back of the Maybach. You are ready. Thank you, Ruth said, hugging the older woman. For saving me. For saving my sanity. You saved yourself, my dear, Matron Lim said. She turned to Tae-Wook. And you, Mr. Kang. Administrator Choi tells me I have a new job title and a lot of work to do. Make them listen, Tae-Wook said, shaking her hand. Oh, I will, she promised with a wink. I have been waiting 30 years for someone to give me a hammer to break these walls. Go home. Be happy. The car pulled away, gliding smoothly into the traffic of Seoul. Tae-Wook sat in the back, his arm around Ruth, his hand resting on Hannah's blanket. He watched the city scroll by, the skyscrapers, the billboards, the rush of humanity. It was the same city he had ruled for years, but it looked different now. It looked like a place that could be changed. They arrived at the villa in the hills of Hanamdong. The staff had lined up to welcome them, bowing low. There were flowers everywhere, lilies and roses, filling the air with a sweet, heady perfume. "Welcome home, little one," Ruth whispered to Hannah as they walked through the front doors. That night, after the nurses had been settled in the guest wing, Tae-Wook had insisted on night nurses, though Ruth suspected he would be the one awake. Tae-Wook stood on the balcony of their master bedroom. The air was crisp and cool. He held a glass of water, looking out over his domain. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Director Ryu. The contract was still on the table, renegotiated, the terms now heavily in Tae-Wook's favor. Ryu knew the balance of power had shifted. Tae-Wook wasn't just a partner now, he was a man who had stared down a crisis and won. But Tae-Wook didn't care about Ryu. He heard the soft slide of the glass door. Ruth stepped out, wrapped in a silk robe, joining him at the railing. "She is asleep?" he asked. "Fast asleep," Ruth nodded. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "She likes the crib. She likes the quiet." Tae-Wook wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I was thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she smiled. "About what Matron Lim said. About cages and flying." He looked at the city lights. "I have spent my whole life building an empire of fear. I thought it was the only way to be safe. But looking at you, looking at Hannah, I don't want to be the king of the underworld anymore, Ruth. I want to be the man who made the daylight safe for her." Ruth looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "That is a big change, Tae-Wook. Can you do it?" "I can," he said. "It will take time. It will be harder than killing my enemies. But I will legitimize everything. Every shipping container. Every warehouse. I will turn this family into something she can be proud of. No more shadows." "No more shadows," Ruth agreed. She reached up and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promise and hope. "I love you," Tae-Wook whispered into her hair. "My Ruth. My Hannah. My life." "We love you too," she said. "Now come inside. It's cold, and your daughter will probably wake up in an hour demanding to see her favorite person." "That would be me," Tae-Wook said with a rare, boyish grin. "Don't get cocky," Ruth laughed, pulling him toward the warmth of the room. Tae-Wook took one last look at the city. The darkness was still there, lurking in the alleyways and the boardrooms. But here, on this balcony, in this house, there was only light. He turned his back on the night and followed his wife inside, closing the door on the past, ready to begin the long, beautiful work of the future. And that is the incredible conclusion to Ruth and Tae-Wook's journey. This story reminds us that, even in the darkest moments, love can be a catalyst for justice and profound change. If this story touched your heart, please comment Team Hannah below so we know you made it to the end. Thank you for watching AfroSoul Love Tales, where we blend cultures and hearts. So please smash that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with a friend who believes in the power of love.